Hello everyone, and welcome to part 9 or part 4, depending on how you're taking all of this in, of the top albums of 2022. For yes, it is part 9, albums 20 through 11, or part 4, albums 20 through 11, if you're just checking everything out on YouTube. Before I get into this part of the list proper, I just want to say that, as in full transparency, I'm recording all 5 of these parts in a row, and between the previous entry and here, I had a big old mental breakdown, and I think a huge part of that pretty much comes down to the fact that I need to take a break. I know a lot of people might not even know I exist, but I've done over 50 plus interviews this year. As you can see, I've reviewed at least 150 albums this year, and I'm finishing up all of this. I did some side videos, I did some other YouTube stuff, my podcast, which I did, I think it was like 31 episodes I've done this year before I had to take a break with that. Everything's kind of fallen apart on me mentally, so I'm going to be putting on a brave face for this part, and of course the top 10. And I am out for the rest of the year, at least into January, if not longer. I know that's pretty much a suicide for anyone checking out my stuff, because if you're not constantly putting stuff out all the time, you're instantly forgotten. But I've never been cool. I've never really been liked. I need to do what's best for me. So no more interviews this year. I have one in the can, and I have no idea if it's getting released this year. Full transparency. No more reviews. Top 10 albums of December 2022 is not a thing that's going to happen. It's not going to happen next year or the following year. I don't cover really December albums after the second week, because if you release anything from mid-December onwards, you're a jerk. You're not going to be seeing a worst of list, because why would I ever spend my time listening to music I don't enjoy? And maybe on social media, I'll briefly talk about my favorite movies and games that I've played this year. Maybe. But otherwise, this and the video I'm going to record immediately after this is the end of Heavy Debriefings for 2022. And I'll be back in 2023. I can't stop doing this. That's not going to happen. But just like every year, I usually take December off, and this one is more needed than I realized. So let's get into the list proper. And before I forget, check out the rules below, because you're probably wondering why I do things the way that I do. It's all in the list below. So, check it out before we get into album 20. So here we go. At number 20, it is Devin Townsend with Lightwork. This album might have been up higher had it come out sooner, had I had the chance to hear it sooner. I didn't get involved with his PR this album cycle. I wish I could have, but that's the breaks, little man, break it down. So I only got to hear this album as it came out, and putting it any higher than number 20 would have felt wrong to me. But with that said, this is a fantastic album about breaking through the pandemic, trying to let go of your inhibitions, and trying to move forward in the best positive light that you possibly can. No pun intended. The production is so cool. Every song has its own feel behind it. This is an album that's meant to make you smile and happy. It's not about writing the greatest riffs of all time, the greatest solos, the greatest vocal performances. This is just how Devin was feeling during the pandemic and just wanted to write some music to be able to get through the day. And how could you blame him for that? We all need that. And the more I listen to this album, the more I realize that I needed this album too. So Heavy Debbie, I thank you so much for this album. Whatever you do next, which I know is going to be so drastically different than Lightwork, I can't wait to see what's next. But also, take a break when you need to. I just talked about how I need a break. You need to do the same. Number 19 is Astronoid with Radiant Bloom, the third album from this band, and the blast beats are back. The blast beats are back, people. Hey, everybody! The blast beats are back! But seriously, yes, the blast beats are back in some songs. But I feel like this is a great combination of the first two albums. It gets super heavy, it gets super poppy, the vocals are sublime, the production is that great mix of raw but clear and punchy. The music feels like a dreamscape. It's almost black gaze, it's almost dream pop, it's almost prog metal, it's almost pop rock. It's Astronoid. And I know people are going to say this is not their best album, and I've seen some people say it's their worst album, but to me, it's the third album on an amazing album streak from Astronoid, and I'm so happy this album came out the way that it has. Coming in at number 18 is Revocation with Nether Heaven, a conceptual album about battling through the 9 stages of hell. And maybe this is their best album to date? And that is so hard to say that as well too, because they've yet to release a dud in my eyes. Every single Revocation album stands out on its own in its own different way. And this stuff is just so cool. And it really feels like every song on all 9 of these songs feel like the soundtrack to their respective Circle of Hell. And of course with the last song not only featuring Corpse Grinder of Cannibal Corpse, but also one of the final appearances of Trevor of the Black Dahlia Murder before his unfortunate suicide, which is far too often this year with musicians that I care about committing suicide, but that's another discussion for a different time. I will say, this is not his final performance, but it's one of his final performances, and he did a magnificent job. And I think it's easy to say that this is the best Revocation album. There's arguments for every single one, but right now, this is my favorite one. Nether Heaven, a great masterwork of metal, whether you like thrash, progressive death, technical death, death metal, or just metal. Revocation is the band for you. Number 17 is Blind Guardian with God Machine, and this is the album I always hoped they were going to make again. It's power metal, but it's speed metal at the same time as well. They really cut back on the orchestration. I mean, there's still some there, but it doesn't make up the whole album like their previous work. It's back to the old school days, but with that modern filter, and it's just so fantastic to hear the speed, the power metal riffs, Hansi's great vocal performance and lyrical content from so many great pieces of literature that are so fantastic to be heard through the eyes of Blind Guardian. The production is absolutely killer. The songs are so good. There's so many great things that could be done with this album. Every single song feels like it could be performed live and should be performed live. That is the sign of a good album. And the God Machine? Yeah, I mentioned it before. I think this is my favorite album since Imaginations from the Other Side. I can see a lot of people disagreeing with me on that. I don't care. That's how I personally feel. And if you want a great intro album into Blind Guardian, you can't do better than the God Machine. Coming in at number 16 is Lacrimas Profundae with How to Shroud Yourself with Night. And this may be also the best album that they've ever written. It captures so much in the form of experimentation and genre bending. There's elements of black metal in here, gothic metal, hard rock, pop rock, gothic, atmospheric moments, and of course the amazing vocal display is just superb. The production is fantastic on here, and this is another album where every song feels like it should be played live at some point. This is an album chock full to the brim with songs that would go over perfectly in a live setting. For those that forgot about the band in the early 2000s, you've really missed out. Especially between this and the previous album with the lineup change. They've only gotten stronger, and How to Shroud Yourself with Night might be the finest example yet. At number 15, I have Wolfheart with King of the North, a band that has only gotten better with every subsequent album, and I feel like this is their best work to date. Being able to talk about Finnish Nordic gods, being able to display more clean vocals, still being brutal and heavy and folky, And also having Jesse Leach of Killswitch Engage being able to contribute after showing off that he was a fan of Wolfheart. And this song was written in 2 days by Tomas to be able to be on the album. The song Ancestor was not meant to be a part of the album, but once Jesse Leach wanted to be a part of this album, the song was written in 2 days, and it's possibly the best song on the album. Which is rare to say about a single in my eyes, but it's just that good. This is melodic death metal done to a perfect T. And Wolfheart, again, only gets better with every subsequent album, and Tomas can do no wrong. Whether it's between this or any of his other endeavors, I love what he does, and I can't wait to see what's next. At number 14, I have the debut album from Venator with Echoes from the Gutter. An Austrian band that really has that great revival 80s heavy metal feel, but it's done just enough to be a 2022 album. It's a perfect throwback, especially when you look at the album cover. It feels like a B-grade horror movie in the perfect way. This album is fantastic from start to finish. It captures everything I love about that revival sound. It feels like it was recorded in the 80s. It's got the proficiency of a 2022 band, which is fantastic to hear. The vocals are insane on here, whether you get those great high-pitched falsettos, the lower register that goes throughout most of the album, the musicianship, the songwriting, everything about this has that great 80s feel. And if you love that 80s heavy metal, speed metal, and revival metal, Venator wrote one of the best albums in 2022 for that. And if you haven't heard it, you're making a big mistake by not checking them out any further. Seriously, check this album out. And number 13 was one that I had the hardest time being able to put into this part of the list because I feel like any of these songs, any of these albums could be a part of the top 10. But this one I feel bad about having in the top 20 particularly, but it is the collaboration between Vikram Shankar and Tom England known as Silent Skies. The sophomore album Nectar shows the duo being able to be more comfortable with the style that they want to write. It's very cinematic, it's very ambient, has the right amount of pop and rock and emotional moments behind it. Being able to hear Tom England make music like this is just magnificent. And of course, Vikram Shankar is one of the greatest modern geniuses in hard rock, heavy metal, and progressive music. And this album is a shining example of what Vikram can do. This is probably the lightest album on the entire 150 albums that I covered this year in this list. But that doesn't mean it's not one of the darkest albums. And all it takes is just listening to any song off this album and you'll understand what I'm talking about. This is an emotional album that makes me tear up every single time I hear it, and that's in the best way possible. So if you need something that's not just pure metal or pure hard rock, you want something more cinematic, more post-feeling, ambient, but with all the dark emotion that you would hear in an Evergrey album, seriously, check out Nectar by Silent Skies. And number 12 is one of the great melodic death metal albums of this year, and I feel so bad about not having this in the top 10, but that's just what happens sometimes. It is Horizon Ignited with Towards the Dying Lands, and this is the perfect combination of melodic death and hard rock. Their previous album, you can really tell they were getting their bearings together, but I feel like on this album they really found out what they want to be able to accomplish from here forward. It's got great melodeath that is just a great tribute to the past and the present, and it's got that great hard rock feeling for the future. The fact that this band is so young makes my jaw drop. They're all younger than me, and they're putting out some of the finest melodeath that's ever been recorded. And it's my second favorite melodic death metal album of the year. And arguably it's my favorite hard rock album of the year if you look at the songs that are very laced in hard rock. But seriously, Horizon Ignited proving that Finnish metal just simply can't be beat. And finally, at number 11, before tomorrow's top 10 of 2022, I got 2020, or MMXX. I say 2020 because that's what it is in Roman numerals. But the debut album, Sacred Cargo, is a melodic doom masterpiece. Featuring some of my favorite singers in all of melodic doom, from bands like Swallow the Sun, Edge of Sanity, Antimatter, My Dying Bride, and more. It's a loving tribute to melodic doom, whether it gets more into the funeral doom side, melodic doom, death doom. It captures it all. And this international band is just fantastic. I love the vocalists that they've gotten a part of this. This is one of the rare exceptions of being able to hear Dan Swano do some growls again. It's very short in the song that he performs, but it's great hearing those growls again. And of course, his unmatched clean vocals, which cannot be topped. This is an album that I really wish would have made it into the top 10, but there's just 10 albums that I just had a little more passion for because I had more time with them. This is a later release that came out this month, just a few weeks back, and had I had it more, it probably would be in the top 10, but much like Devin Townsend, I had to be fair, and even having it in my top 20 says a lot about the staying power. And if this is what they're doing on their debut album, their sophomore album, maybe one of the finest albums to ever hit the doom scene. And that does it for part 9 or part 4, depending on how you look at it, for the top albums of 2022. Tomorrow, whether you look at thatdrummerguy.com or check out the video version here on YouTube, I will be hitting the cream of the crop, the top of the top, the highest points of the year, the top 10 albums of 2022. Thanks for sticking around, and until tomorrow, this is Heavy Debriefings and Josh Runquist saying, see ya.